Oh, with this video, I'd like to provide you with some biblical support of the biblical doctrines of the biblical infallibility, biblical inerrancy, biblical non-confusion, because 1 Corinthians 14:33 assures us that God is definitely not the author of confusion. Did I mention the doctrine of biblical inerrancy, the doctrine of biblical integrity? And I'd like to furnish you with a couple of verses that substantiate these dogmas or doctrines. Today's topic will be on whether when Jesus entered Jerusalem, did he cleanse the temple the same day or not? Again, the question is, when Jesus entered Jerusalem, did he cleanse the temple that very same day or not? To this question, the Bible infallibly, inerrantly, non-confusingly, and non-contradictory unambiguously and unequivocally answers with both yes and no. Again, to the question, when Jesus entered Jerusalem, did he cleanse the temple that very same day? The Bible answers with a very clear both yes and no. The answer yes comes from Matthew 21:12. The crowds replied, I'm going to start with verse 11. The crowds replied, this is Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth in Galilee. Then Jesus went into the temple courts and drove out all who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those selling doves. Other translations render it, Jesus entered the temple courts and drove out all who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves. Another translation renders it, he knocked over the tables of the money changers and the chairs of those selling doves or pigeons. In other words, he wreaked havoc and created chaos there. Talk about loving your neighbor as yourself and being meek, humble, and mild. And do unto the others as you want the others to do unto yourself. Then it logically follows that Jesus wanted people to do unto himself the same thing, to wreak havoc, create chaos, overturn tables, and drive out people from their houses or whatever. Now, the verse that supports this verse is from Matthew chapter 11. Where the answer is a clear no. It starts with, I'm going to start with verse 1. And when they came nigh to Jerusalem, unto Bethphage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives, he sendeth forth two of his disciples. And then he continues. He utters he explains how they will find a colt somewhere tied by a door, whatever. Then verse 11. And Jesus entered into Jerusalem and into the temple. And when he had looked around upon all things, and now the eventide was come, he went out unto Bethany with the 12. And now, verse 12. And on the morrow, when they were come from Bethany, he was hungry. Seeing a fig tree, he curses it. And then they come to Jerusalem. In other words, it's on the morrow, the tomorrow, the following day, the next day, they come to Jerusalem. And Jesus went into the temple and began to cast out them that sold and bought in the temple, and overthrew the tables of the money changers and the seats of them that sold doves. Now imagine the chaos that he created. I don't know if he had a stick or a whiplash, or I don't know what he had, and he overturned all tables and cast out or drove out all people. He was probably yelling and cussing at them and whatever. And verse 16 assures us that he would not suffer that any man should carry any vessel through the temple. He did not allow any man carrying any vessel through the temple. Now, as you can see, the Bible persistently and perseverantly answers with yes and no to hundreds of questions, yes and no at the same time. And here, more specifically, when Jesus entered Jerusalem, did he cleanse the temple that same day? The Bible answers with a yes and no. And I'd like to talk now real quick about what we call the fundamentals of logic, or the fundamental principles of logic. Logic is the study of reasoning, and reasoning is the process by which we use evidence to try to judge things, make judgment, try to discover or persuade others of the truth. Reasoning is verbally expressed in arguments. And the primary goal of logic is the appraisal of these arguments. The proper study of logic should equip you with techniques for distinguishing good arguments from bad arguments. Since logic concerns itself with the analysis of arguments, the arguments are constructed of statements of propositions. And a study of logic begins with defining what is meant by statement or proposition, which for introductory purposes may be considered to be synonymous. In other words, a statement or a proposition for introductory purposes should be considered, or we should consider it synonymous for now. And a statement or proposition must satisfy two defining characteristics. A, it is what is unambiguously asserted by a sentence, and B, it has a truth value. I will repeat. A statement or proposition must satisfy two defining characteristics. A, it is what is unambiguously asserted by a sentence, and it has a truth value. Now, the fundamentals of logic are also called laws of thought, and there are practically three fundamental laws of thought, or laws of logic. First one, the law of non-contradiction. Second one, the law of excluded middle or third. And third one, the law or principle of identity. And I'd like to concentrate now on the law of non-contradiction, which states, in short, that nothing can both be and not be. Now I'd like to repeat that. Nothing can both be and not be. In other words, two or more contradictory statements cannot both be true in the same sense at the same time. In other words, A cannot be both A and not A at the same time and in the same sense. A cannot be both A and not A at the same time and at the same sense. In classical logic, the law of non-contradiction states that contradictory statements cannot both be true in the same sense at the same time. In other words, the two propositions A is B and A is not B are mutually exclusive, and A is B and A is not B cannot be valid in the same sense at the same time. The law of excluded middle or excluded third states that everything must either be or not be for a purpose of fruitful and how can I say a valid, fruitful discussion. Discussion that makes sense. You must accept, or when there's a debate, you must agree that on the fact that everything must either be or not be, and there's no middle. In other words, there's no third part. In accordance with the law of excluded middle or excluded third, for every proposition, either its positive or its negative form is true. And I will repeat that. For every proposition or statement, either its positive or its negative form is true. In other words, everything must either be or not be, or everything is either is or is not. Cannot be both is and is not. And as you can see from this video and my previous videos, there are various questions that are posed or that I posed, and to which the Bible answers with both yes and no at the same time. In other words, the Bible answers with two questions, with two answers, contradictory answers at the same time. In this one, when Jesus entered Jerusalem, did he cleanse the temple the same day? The Bible answers with a yes and no. According to the Gospel of John, what did Jesus say about bearing his own witness? He answered, if I bear witness to myself, my testimony is not true or not valid, in John 5:31. If I bear witness to myself, my testimony is true or is valid, according to John 8:14, which is contradictory and which contradicts the law of thought or the fundamentals of logic, the fundamental principles of logic. I hope you've learned something from this video, because this video is for education purposes, for the purposes of your edification, illumination, enlightenment, and constant daily growth and knowledge of the Word of God and of the Bible, of the infallible Bible. And thank you very much for listening and watching. I will appreciate your comments and opinions in the section below. I love you with the love of the Lord, and may God abundantly bless you. Until the next time, bye.